Thanks, guys, for showing up. JB wanted to send you a text earlier to say thanks for coming to our first event on Tuesday.
Yeah, basically, Ryan's into solar, and we were trying to. We're talking earlier about different solutions during this time period, getting into cost-cutting, cost-cutting solutions, renewable energy solutions, disinfecting solutions, and trying to figure out how some of those things can fit under PACE financing. So,
okay, well, good. Ryan, welcome, and we'll go through some of this stuff, and you guys can ask questions. We can do it back and forth if we need to.
Ryan, are you familiar with PACE at all, or is this a brand new financing tool?
Can you hear me?
I can't see you, but I can.
Yeah, I think the video's not working. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Sorry, I thought my microphone wasn't working, so I've been trying to figure that out. What was the question again? I'm sorry.
Are you familiar with PACE at all, or is this a brand new?
No, I've worked with PACE on several projects. Unfortunately, some of those never went through.
Yeah.
The business cycle is really long, and a lot of different factors can really change the viewpoint of either the owner or I'm familiar. So I've worked with actually PACE with getting it into McKinney. I've worked with the regional head who moved on. She's no longer there. I believe I've talked to, what's her name? I haven't talked to her in a while. The president of Texas PACE Authority as well.
Charlene.
Charlene.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've talked to her a few times on about some projects, and just really when a couple years ago when I was really working on commercial, and especially recently with another company I tried to launch, but it didn't work out with my partner. We put the numbers together for PACE and without PACE, and I mean it's just it's a world of a difference when you don't have upfront costs and you're paying property taxes. So.
Mm-hmm. All right, we'll get into we won't get into some of the objections to PACE on this particular webinar because it's more of an introductory.
By the way, real quick, I have big news. I had my first in-house dining Jimmy John sandwich in 2 months earlier today.
Wow.
To sit down at a table in a restaurant and have a sandwich. Isn't that amazing?
How did you eat through the face mask?
Well, that's the funny part. I actually, there was a Mexican restaurant next door, and they said they were opening their patio at 25% to capacity, but they had I had a face mask when I walked in, then I took it off to eat, and then this older guy walked in with a face mask on, and he looked at the employees who didn't have masks on. He said, "So you guys aren't wearing masks?" And they said, "No." And he said, "Okay, I'm leaving. You all should wear masks. Shame on you."
Oh,
wow.
So it was a little tense lunch, but anyways,
yeah.
I just thought it was the first day that I actually noticed that the restaurants are actually open in I don't know how long. So,
you're a pioneer.
I mean,
yeah, you're
really
brave or crazy.
Yeah, that's why we wanted to do these meetings, because it's so hard to know what's actually going on in the world. And I thought I'm glad you got to be part of the meeting on Wednesday with Courtney and Lisa, because I thought what they had to say was interesting and insightful. They're busier than ever, and they're killing it right now. So I love hearing all the stuff from people of what's actually happening outside of my house.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think the PACE financing is the most important piece, because everything that people are looking to do right now is going to involve what is $0 out of my pocket. What can I get done, on a loan or however it's structured. People are not going to be looking at anything where to buy a new product, especially if it's luxury or anything else. They're looking at cost cutting and loans, and what can they get done with that. So anyways,
and there's a lot of PACE money out there. You're absolutely right. This whole pursuit of using PACE was to try to get those that are cost conscious when it comes to doing their project finance to really take a look at its advantages and not stay so focused on, some of the things that they seem to want to object on almost regularly. First of one being the high interest rate that comes with a PACE loan. We get that private capital, it does have higher 5, 6, 7% interest rates, higher than what they think they get from their bank, but in reality, you're getting a different product altogether. And there's people out there that are better at explaining the nuances in that with respect to, project finance internally and hurdle rates and how PACE outperforms those things. What I try to do is say, look, on a practical sense, if you're buying and selling commercial property, multifamily in particular, but not exclusively, then you're only going to feel the burn of that high interest rate on that PACE loan if you are not passing it through to your tenants or your lessees like you're supposed to be doing, and you're paying for it out of your own pocket instead of, as part of your rate structure or your rent structure. And you're also, if you're going to stay in that property for the entire 20, 25-year term, 30-year term in some of the solar cases, then yeah, you do pay more. But that 100% out of pocket and those advances on the front side that I'll show you on some of these case studies, they really they represent some quick relief, short-term, as well as the long-term savings that have, for the most part, built-in savings to loan ratio that has to pass muster to even be a PACE project. So there's a lot of safeguards in there rather than just running through your bank and borrowing money and then maybe having to figure out what's the best energy efficient remodel or rehab elements to take on. PACE has independent third-party review to come through and evaluate those things to make sure they work. There's safeguards in not borrowing too much money against your property's value to make this work. And then what I try to do with $3 billion and the solar carport is bring in additional revenue sources that extend past, your property assessment piece, so that you're cashing in on this investment on multiple fronts. But let me get started with the deck, and then I'll run through and we can ask questions on the fly if you want to.
Yeah, I think it would help you guys if you post it to the meetup groups, because generally if you're trying to meet new people, the meetup groups, like, they can scan titles of presentations. I mean, webinars are tricky in the first place, but you might be able to nab a lot of people if you're posted in that meetup forum, because then they can be browsing for other things or keywords and go find you all if you're trying to do a reoccurring webinar.
Okay. Well, we'll make note of that going forward with these, and then these, of course, will be recorded for people because we know a lot of people don't view them in real time anyway. But thanks. That's a great trick. We're learning these tricks. Stephanie is the manager of the marketing, so she's got all the tricks up her sleeve. So here's the title here: CPACE, Solar Recovery, Commercial Project Finance as COVID-19 Resiliency. COVID-19 is the reason that we have all this downtime to do this sort of networking and to have these seminars, but it's also top of mind right now because we're moving into a world unknown. And for those who own commercial real estate and who are going to be looking at, maybe some significant change in your occupancy. Maybe there's more people that are deciding that the stay-at-home thing works. Maybe more businesses decide they don't want to lease space because they figured out how to run their operation a little leaner. As a result of COVID-19, that's going to have impact on those property owners, and above and beyond what we're suffering right now. And so I'm trying to gear this project finance towards answering, hey, how do I make next year sting a little less, or this year, hurt a little less? How do I improve the property without jumping into my bank account to make out a loan when I've already had to do, so much other stuff with respect to the
not only
PPP.
That, who's still loaning money, right? The banks are overwhelmed, grant money's running out.
Yeah.
Where is the money coming from, and how can you access it?
Yeah, that's a perfect question. And we know that, lenders in the PACE field, Petros, Greenworks Lending, Frontier, Counterpoint SRE, there's dozens and dozens of them across the country, have, private capital waiting to be lent out. It's just, it's a little bit of a hurdle for reasons we talked about at the top of the call, but we can, we can dig into those later. First and most important is, how do we utilize this stuff? So let's get into the basics for those who are, inexperienced with PACE. It's an acronym for Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy. Started out in Berkeley, California, in the residential solar market, where residential solar enthusiasts couldn't see a return on that investment in the time that it was going to, take to make sense, or they were going to flip out of their home before that investment made any sense. And so CPACE was born. I forget the gentleman's name who put it together. I believe he was an economist, but you can find some videos with him on YouTube. And essentially, you're borrowing this capital, 100% of the money you need to put solar on your roof. And instead of making, a monthly payment to a bank for that loan, and then pressing the cost of that loan against your savings from your solar energy system, they tie the return of that loan to your property taxes. And whenever you go to pay, you have a fixed portion of that cost. Say if it was $10,000, you'd have, a fixed portion of that overall cost added to your property taxes that you pay, once a year. And so as you're holding money back in escrow, you add a little piece to that, 1/12 of that annual assessment in your monthly mortgage payment or something like that. And at the end of the year, you're not having to come up with surprise, this payment. So it's the same concept. They modified it and put some restrictions on it with respect to how much you can borrow. Currently in Texas, you can borrow 20% of your property's assessed value if you have a mortgage. If you don't have a mortgage, you own that property clean, then you could borrow additional 10% or 30% of that property's value to put towards a project. If you have a $5 million property, then that's a significant amount of money that you can borrow to make enhancements to the property. Let's talk about some of the things that will pay for. HVAC. You can do chillers and boilers. You can do low flow water fixtures. You can do solar energy systems in our case. You could do window upgrades or enhancements as long as they're energy efficient. A roof. It's the host of items that you would normally cash out to refurbish. As long as we can measure the energy savings from those items, they can be used to establish what they call a savings to loan ratio. And once that's a 1-to-1 or better, then that qualifies as a tangible PACE project. You can move along. I've put a couple of resources that you can click on. Texas PACE Authority is a great go-to. Ryan was talking earlier about Charlene. I think they're doing a great job at that nonprofit down there in Austin as far as getting the word out about PACE. That's how I learned about it, through one of their free seminars for contractors. You had all types there.
She's great.
And
she's great. I mean, she's
just fantastic. And they're still on the verge of bringing all of Dallas County into the PACE network. It hasn't happened yet, and so areas like Carrollton or Richardson, they're not. Yeah, the Grand Prairie, Irving, we're not able to utilize PACE at the moment. That day is coming. All of Dallas City is, and additionally in North Texas, all of Tarrant County is in PACE, the entirety of it. And then you have little city areas, Corinth, Farmers Branch, Prosper, and Ryan, you were talking about McKinney. Did they ever go live with their PACE program?
I got them to sit down with the city manager and talk to them. And I also sat down with the mayor of McKinney. But it was just something, he's super Republican, didn't want to be as progressive
And
Yeah.
it takes 2 city council meetings, so it's getting the city council involved and pumped up for it. And then it was more of like, I already knew that Frisco or Denton started out, and then it's kind of spread. And now to see, just 2 years later, when it was only Tarrant County and like around Austin, and it's grown considerably. So it's really cool to see.
It is. And if you're out there as a contractor, take a look at pace, because that may be a hurdle for you to clear with your customers on projects. And if you're a property owner, do the same, because you can really take a benefit of this great tool. And it's not just in Texas, it's in other states as well. I think we're up to 37 or something like that. I don't really follow it outside of Texas at the moment, just because there's plenty in this area. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, yeah, because there's so much, and every state's completely different.
Exactly. How can solar carport help me recover? So I want to drill right down to the specifics on the carport side. They definitely these can help you in other ways. They don't just have to be solar carports, but for the sake of some of the added benefits that we'll go through here, I think it's a smart move. For one, it's your parking lot. It's empty right now. Getting projects done out there are not going to be as cumbersome in your day-to-day operations.
Well, and I would also assume that there are a lot of businesses making all kinds of changes to, for retail businesses moving online. So there's probably a lot of activity inside of a lot of business for a lot of business owners right now outside of their buildings. So going outside to the parking lot is going to be less disruptive for a lot of people.
Sure. And, if all things were the same and normal, we didn't have COVID-19, it's still hot as all get out in Texas in our summers. And that shade amenity has been used for years, decades, to attract tenants, to retain them in some cases, or they're using it as a executive perk, if you will, rather than, making a cash investment on covered parking. Let the PACE financing pay for it by housing your solar array, which obviously has that benefit of reducing the electricity costs within the structure itself. So that's the gist of it. I mean, it's the same everywhere. You may not have enough roof space for a solar array of any size to do any damage to your electric bill, and that carport will definitely allow you to expand that system size. I always approach clients with this one philosophy, and it's a little bit hokey, but just kind of deal with me on it. And it's this: the sun broadcasts 1,000 watts for every square meter on planet Earth every day, and we don't have the capability of harnessing all of that 1,000 watts efficiently with current technology, but we can get really good at it with solar, and it gets better and better and better. I think we're in the 30% range at the moment. Nevertheless, as that sun is beating down on your real estate, that's a resource, that's a natural resource, a fusion transfer, if you will, of energy that belongs to you. And rather than watch it slowly degrade your paint surfaces or your roof, or break down your asphalt in your parking lot, why don't you capture it with the technology that's proven and incentivized, and then transfer that light energy into usable electricity in real time that you can make money with. It's yours, but you gotta put in the investment to harvest it. It's a simple way of looking at it. If you owned a farmland and you didn't do anything with it, shame on you. You're just paying taxes on grass. But your parking lot, your rooftop, that's your farm. But you got to harvest it if you're going to make money. And solar is the way to do it. And it's never been cheaper. And that's why you have all these instruments that come out that can pay for it in new ways. You see here in the bullet list that I go through, that's there. I want to draw attention to one that I think helps the most in the COVID world, and that's the second bullet. Solar carports earn 26% of carport and solar equipment costs as federal investment tax credits through the end of this year. Unless we get some, legislation that extends the ITC investment tax credit, we're going to see the 26% drop to 22% January 1st, 2021. And after that year, it drops and holds. It's scheduled to drop and hold at 10% from there on. It was 30% of the cost of the solar as of last year, but we've lost 4% this year. So this year, which we've already lost one quarter to COVID-19, really shortens the timetable that you have in order to put some of this stuff in play and grab the most tax credit value that you can. So, imagine having, a little more than a fourth of this project that you do come back to you in the form of a tax credit against any earnings down the road. You can hold those solar tax credits for 20 years. They can carry forward for quite a while. So 2021 or 2020 doesn't look like a good year for you as a result of COVID-19. Just sit on those tax credits and use their value in 2021 when you return. And I go through the other bullets here. In most cases, the CPACE loans, they're not going to draw that annual assessment until your property taxes are due the following year. Because even if you were to get the equipment in the ground this year, I think they have the ability to give you 1 year free of assessments. That has to be seen on a case-by-case basis, but count on not making that assessment in this first year. The other statements that I'd like to point out is that their property owners can charge concessions. We talked about that before. Maybe not right now, but when things do stabilize, those covered parking spaces are now an amenity that can carry with it, $20. I've seen as high as $30, $50 a month to have covered parking. And that's all, cash flow in your pocket. That doesn't necessarily have to go back towards paying this PACE assessment. I'll show you in a couple of slides later how that works. Go ahead.
Question for Quincy. Maybe just think about it. Okay, so since we're obviously in a down market right now, property values are probably going to be falling soon. So how, if the PACE financing is based off a percentage of the assessed property value, is that from, when is that assessment taking place? Is that from last year's or this year's, or because essentially if the property value is lesser this year, then they're going to get less money, to use.
Right. Yeah, I see what you're saying. That could reduce your PACE threshold, your project finance threshold. I haven't seen that just yet, mostly because, for reasons Stephanie mentioned earlier, banks are so tied up with conducting the recovery business. It would be interesting to see, what that does to that 20% or that 30% threshold that people need in order to do these projects under. It could very well, we could see, receding there. I don't know. That's a good question to find out, though. I think we could contact some of the PACE providers to see if they've had to deal with this or what sort of.
Yeah, because at least for 2020, you can expect that property values will be dropping. To the degree, who knows, but it could be significant. So, I would try to look into that a little bit.
Sure. And what I try to do, because carports are such a premium on top of a rooftop solar installation, I tend to target projects that are going to have more than enough room to cover a project. A $30 million property is easy to see from Google Earth a lot of times. And, that gives me quite a room to work within. But again, all that I had been doing in the past was pre-COVID-19. So we may be having to deal with a little bit of a reality check with respect to that. That's a really good point. I'm going to lose some sleep over that. Thanks a lot, JB. I want to get into some case studies. In the interest of time, I broke them down in small, medium, and large, and then various structures or commercial property types. This first one, this is a classic example of something that Ryan was talking about earlier, where or one of our early or number one hurdles of getting PACE done is that the senior lender or the mortgage holder for your property has to sign off and allow the CPACE loan to be senior to them in the stack. Generally, that's not a good place for banks. But when they look into the way PACE works, it's senior in the same way all of the property taxes that are already assessed on your property are senior. You cannot own commercial property and not pay your property taxes because you'll get in a lot of trouble. And this assessment that comes with the PACE loan sits in that same place. So it's not like it's third-party capital that's jumping the line with their own interests in mind. It's legislated through our county, and it's seen as an enhancement to that particular property. And on the good side of that, if you are the originator or the borrower of this PACE loan, it's not sitting with you, it's sitting with the property. So should you decide to sell this property and move on, you're not having to cover that entire PACE loan in the sale price of that property. You can leave the balance of it on the property itself, and your buyer has to be made aware. Their lending institution has to sign off on that. So there's that hurdle. But once you show them how you manage to cover that PACE assessment year over year, since it's a fixed cost, it's as easy as saying, here's what you need to include in your lease structure in order to meet this special assessment. It'll never go up, it'll never go down, it'll stay the same. And with it comes all these built-in cost savings that are actually going up in value because electricity has a tendency to increase 2 to 3% a year, and your solar energy offsets increase in value in lockstep with those electricity increases. So here's a quick synopsis of this project. This is actually the project that's stalled right now because the lender, a small bank, did not want to take that lien position, even though we advised them directly that there was going to be no issue with them foreclosing on the customer. They needed to.
Solutions for when that happens and how you're working through that?
Right. So thank you. Yeah. What we're trying to do instead is go outside of this mortgage holder, find a new bank to refinance the balance on this property and the PACE loan, basically bringing them a new customer, walking it in through the door. And the nice part is there are soft cost advantages on the PACE loan that will pay all your closing costs, or at least roll them into the PACE note along with the other equipment that you're financing, so that you're not having to come out of pocket. It's a lot of paperwork, but spreading a refinance cost across a 20-year project takes a lot of the sting out, and it makes it easier to move it to a bank that's willing to do business. It's unfortunate we couldn't bring their original holder along. We never really want to disrupt those relationships, but here's what's at stake. The business owner can have an entire new rooftop replaced. He's got a leaking roof in his warehouse, and that could be resolved. He can have his air conditioning rooftop units switched over from the old standard to the 410As. He can have 100 kilowatts of solar to offset his daytime electric use, which is somewhere around, I think, 60% of his usage. He could have an LED lighting retrofit that he had done last year, upgraded to have intelligent lighting sensors installed. And, he can have this done for about $41,000 a year annual assessment. That's not a cheap assessment, and that's not something that this particular client can pass through because he owns this property and is operating out of it. But he also knows that he's going to sell this property in about 5 or 6 years when he goes into retirement. And so he's really on the hook for about $200,000 in some of that payment. On a case-by-case basis, that may be the right way to go, or he could go to the bank and look at borrowing on those terms. But then he's, loading his building up with a lot more debt that has to be addressed at the sale of the business, rather than the pass-through that PACE provides.
And by the way, Quincy, Clint and his business partner, Sean, are looking to buy a warehouse right now. I've got a couple options for him. So I'll let you know how it goes. There might be a way to pitch them a project like this once they close on the property. So they've got it narrowed down to a handful, and we're going through the process right now.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Let's stay in touch with those guys. Let's make this work. This is smart people doing smart things with smart money, and the benefit overall is the environment. And I don't want to lose sight of that, because that's what drives everything we do at Karoshi and 3 Billion, is how do we benefit our clients? How do we benefit the environment as a very important party in this whole game? More financial breakdown on what the energy savings will do for that customer. If you look at the estimated annual savings in the middle column there, it's $14,000 in the first year, because we're pegging it to, I believe, 8 cents a watt or kilowatt hour on his electric bill. But as that increases through the life of that system, so does that savings, as I mentioned before. And you're compounding that savings for this client, because they're going to get that roof, they're going to get new HVAC and the lighting controls too. The estimated investment tax credits in column 1, that's all from the solar. And those numbers go up when you start to compound the cost of the carports as well, because those structures are included in the investment tax savings profile. The lifetime savings is coming from the middle columns there, stacked over the 25-year life of the project. And I give a scope, what the project entails as far as what they're getting for that money. Let's go to the second case study, which is a medium commercial property.
Go back to that slide. I have a question for you. You don't have it down by property owner 1 who's taking advantage of the tax credits, and then property owner 2 once he sells the property, but the second property owner is still coming out ahead because of the lifetime savings of this system being on the building.
You're absolutely right. And you bring up a good point, Stephanie, because in order for PACE to work, the savings from the equipment that's being installed or purchased with the PACE loan has to be at a 1-to-1 or better. And that means that they're going to save enough money from those enhancements to cover that special assessment cost, or the PACE doesn't fund. If we go really, really heavy on the price of our products that we're putting in for these customers, that's going to throw that savings to loan ratio out of whack, and the project won't move. So PACE has some built-in sort of roadblocks to keeping things from being gouged by that, and also not performing like they're supposed to, so that the owner's not making a big assessment on their property annually and not seeing that savings within their operational structure. So yeah, the first in this game, the first adopter gets the spoils of the tax credit. They get the cheese, but there's crumbs left over for everyone else that comes into that property.
Yeah, this is a question that we get a lot: is why would anybody buy a building with this PACE assessment attached to it? But it's not really a burden. The goal of utilizing and leveraging PACE is to make the building operate efficiently. And so I just wanted to point out that it's not a burden on the property. It's a benefit, because you've got now this improved building, that the overall value of the building is better, greater, which makes the bank happy and the property owner happy, but it's also operating efficiently, which is great for the property owner and the environment as well. We don't need to leave that out. That's important too.
You bring up a really good topic, and I can't wait to see some of this reflected through the media. Those building owners that have been sitting idle for this last month and a half, those who have renewable energy systems, or they've done what they can to make their building solid, they're going to see that reflected in, a lower electricity bill relative to their cash flow than those who have not taken any of these energy reduction or energy efficiency measures. Just idle buildings sitting by themselves still cost money to run. You can't turn things completely off in some of these cases. And so having resiliency through your solar energy system, or having, VRF HVAC that's, adjusting its run rate to the body temperature inside, well, it's an empty building, so it's probably not having to work as hard. That's going to show up, and it'll be neat to see how building performance takes center podium once again after this, because that's just one less shock to the system to have your building not draining your coffers. Let's go to the second one here. This is a medium commercial, and this is more of a direct cash flow model. We didn't blow out the solar to meet as much of the demand on the building in this particular project, and it's one of those cases where the market value of the building would have allowed for more solar, but rather what we did was we went with a premium carport product that has a bigger price tag on it, and we did that under the assumption that the property owner's management company could lease out those spaces as an amenity to the building, driving concession revenue. But there was also a roof replacement thrown in, because the lower roof on that structure there to the south of the main tower looks like it's ready for a new roof. So why not tackle that while you're at it? And if we look into the metrics there, it's pretty impressive. First year savings of almost $500,000, $2 million over the lifetime afforded to it by the solar energy that you saw there on the first slide, and a healthy depreciation value in addition to the tax credit. We didn't talk about depreciation on that first project, but solar is afforded moderate accelerated. I can't remember what the acronym for MAKER stands for, but I have it on another slide for you. It's a tax tool that allows you to take, as of 2017, through some other measures, you can take 100% of the asset depreciation
It's
of your solar asset.
It's modified accelerated cost recovery system.
Thank you. That's right. Thanks, finance people. Makers is another factor there on that first year return that we can bring in addition to the solar tax credits that can make, doing this zero cash upfront project very advantageous to property owners. You see the annual savings in the solar,
and
ranging from, go ahead.
The reason that the depreciation number is so high is because you're taking the depreciation on the solar and the carport as one unit together, right? Not just solar.
Absolutely. The carport has, since it's tied to the solar, it affords itself that bundled tax credit and appreciation value. And since it's a premium solar carport, it's carrying a higher cost per space than maybe one of our lower cost designs. So you can take that in the front side, and then after that you've got your annual savings from the solar, which should never be discounted, even though I don't talk about it first. And then if you look at the next slide, I break down how they can pay their assessment, but I also show there on the right that at $35 a space, which you may not be able to score for concessions at this particular time, but pre-COVID-19, $35 was the mid-high to medium range for covered parking for this area of the country. But an extra $50,000 a year just from selling shade isn't bad. What I like to do when I propose these PACE projects to show them how easy it is to create a pass-through payment structure to make sure that annual assessment is covered, is I show them, hey, you take your square footage of your property, you take your annual assessment, you do some quick and easy math, divide the annual assessment by 12 months, divide each month by the square footage And that's what you need to bake into your triple net lease or your rent structure, so that you can put that amount in escrow and then not come up short when it's time to make your assessment. And that's a pretty conservative way to do things. I've had clients tell me they were going to add a few pennies more to that square footage and pocket that themselves, because their tenants at the time, could handle, an increase of X number per square foot. I said, that's great. I don't normally suggest that to people, just because, I don't want them chasing their tenants out with these increases, but they know their customer better than I do. But the beauty of it is, it's going to be with the property. It's there just like the doors and the windows and the walls, and it has a cost associated with it when you're paying your rent. Be sure you use that to cover it, and then anything else you can gain, your solar savings or the parking leases, pocket that or pass it on to your tenants if you need to retain them. Do whatever you need to do with this free money to make your building live another year. I had a pretty conservative electricity cost there at 5 cents a kilowatt hour, and showing what that nets out to in savings as that number goes up. Or if you find clients that have higher rates, generally they have higher rates than they think they do, because of the way we parse things out on our billing here in Texas. It makes people think they're paying 4 cents a kilowatt hour, when in fact you do the math for them and they're paying 9 to 11 cents because of things like demand charges and other pass-throughs. But I like to use a simple number in the middle, just to kind of say, hey, we haven't taken a deep dive into your electricity yet. This is me coming at you from the front door. 5 cents is a good square number, 8 cents sometimes. Case number 3, and this is relevant to a lot of you in the multifamily sector. This client has a master metered community and wanted to see, just how big of a tax credit they could take on the front end of one of these PACE deals after explaining it to them, And I said, well, we could blow out the system size and max out every surface we can find, parking and rooftop, since you are footing the electric bill for this property. And we didn't catch them fast enough to include maybe an upgrade to their central HVAC system, or their chiller system, and they were already undergoing remodel with a new roof. So we missed that piece of it too, just because we didn't know each other. But going back in with carports and solar may or may not be able to charge concessions at this particular property, based on the demographics, but having it as an amenity to attract tenants is always there too, and that has its value. That annual payment of $163,000 is quite steep, especially when you spread it out over 25 years. But remember, this is multifamily. They're probably going to be on that property for 5 of those 25 years. And if you look at, the metrics, they're getting almost $1 million back in tax credits and depreciation in the first year. They are looking at $100,000, $120,000 roughly in savings on that property, which is great for their bottom line as a master metered community. And then if you dig down into how we can propose to pay that back, I do the math. 12 months of that annual payment is $13,000 a month. Divide that by the total square footage of the property, and you're at 19 cents per square foot. That can be, problematic in some areas where cap rate comes into play. We've learned over the years looking at properties with investors. But, if we dialed, some of the system back to maybe something like just the carports and we took the roof out, then you'd see that 19 cents per square foot drop back as well, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 or 9 cents per square foot. But it can be done, and it can be done without, breaking everybody's back, and then giving them something with that. If you have a portion of your day-to-day energy operations coming from the solar, You can choose to reduce, the rent accordingly to the tenant if you want. If you're not charging them for covered parking and their car's not a million degrees every day when they get in and out of it, that may be worth the price of that extra 19 cents per foot. And that, depending on how big those apartments are, it could be 20 bucks a door. Stephanie and I try to avoid pushing anyone higher than the $50 a door increase that they typically want to do in multifamily when they're rehabbing. But, we think we can be an important piece of that, especially when the garden style carport or the garden style multifamily layout lends itself really well to carports. That's been an accepted amenity for a long time. Another story when we get into the newer high-rise apartments and they've got their own garages and they've got their own built-in covered parking. That's a whole different ballgame, but I think you understand. That's all I have for this session, coming close to the hour. I know there's lots of stuff to talk about, but feel free to reach out to us. If you're a contractor, we can help you understand PACE or give you some resources to go to. If you want to work with us through Karoshi to go after some of these properties that we think are great targets, we'd love to hear from you. And if you're a property owner and you really want to have somebody take a look at what all could be done to your property and how this would work for you, we never charge to do an assessment. That's part of our process. And we want to make Dallas-Fort Worth a greener place, and we want to use all the tools in the toolbox to get there. I think that's all I had there. I'm going to stop sharing the screen and we can go back to the actual webinar. All right.
Thanks, Quincy.
Ryan, did you have questions?
Ryan, did you have any comments? Since I know you not as familiar with their solar ports, maybe.
Well, I do. So usually construction costs are the biggest problem with carports, right? And what your base cost is for the project and how much you're going to make off of it and how much you're able to finance it for. Are you guys, do you have pretty low base costs when it comes to the construction, or?
I do. I've been able to procure that through I worked for the carport company that I use now exclusively. I was
how nice. That's cool.
Yeah. So that's helped. I went from sales and marketing director for a few years back in 2008 to manager of the business for a brief stint while their manager was on sabbatical. And now I am, partner with them as their outside sales arm for their carport projects. And as a result of that, I get access to pricing that, other may not get. But, I'm also a rising tide floats all boats kind of guy. And so I'll direct, other solar developers, solar contractors to these guys because of the reason that I was attracted to them in the first place. And that is they don't necessarily have the cheapest carports, but in the metals game, the weight of your steel is what determines the price, and the thickness or the gauge, the strength of that steel is going to be very important when you're trying to put in an expensive solar array that needs a 25-year lifespan, whether it be for PPA or whatever. You don't want to put in substandard carport material only to have someone hit it with a car or truck with bad parking or have it rust out. I think Stephanie can talk anecdotally about having a really bad carport experience with her RAV4. You want to talk about that for a minute? Does that still hurt to talk about the RAV?
On my car. No, we don't need to talk about that.
Well, just, real quick, like I think it was 2010. I can't remember exactly when it was, but we got a record 12 inches of snowfall one night in the DFW area. Do y'all remember that? Metal buildings and poorly constructed or old carports were coming down all over the Metroplex left and right because they just weren't designed for that dead load. No one ever, expected to have 12 inches of snow in this region of the country. And so there just wasn't a whole lot of design for it within, certain buildings. You have roofs collapsing on warehouses and other things too, not just carports. But at the root of that problem is where the structural components of the carport meet the asphalt or the concrete, water gets in anywhere it wants and rusts the rectangular tubing from the inside. And what a lot of carport manufacturers and providers will do to cut costs, they'll take a C-purlin, which is a C-shaped metal, and they'll stitch it together on its face like this to make a rectangular tube. It's lighter, it's cheaper, they can get the project in and win the bid, if you will. But over time, water gets down in those seams and eats the carport out at the where it comes out of the ground. And the next thing you know, high wind or high snow load or a bad driver is toppling the entire canopy as a result of those compromised columns. And if you have a solar array on top of that, you're already in big trouble because, or your insurance company is, I suppose. So I was attracted to this company, USA Eagle Carports. I'll give them a quick plug because they, through their client base, were not using the inferior metal. They were having to use heavier gauge rectangular tubing to keep those carports in the air longer because they serve the commercial covered parking industry almost exclusively. And that makes a better fit for the solar carports. And over time, I've actually seen the price of the solar drop below the carport costs, which when I first got started was exactly the opposite. The carport was the cheaper component and the solar was the more expensive. But strange times now to see that inverse. But yeah, I can help you with construction costs on that all day long. And ways of modifying the carport so that it fits better for solar and doesn't cost as much to get built.
Yeah. You would never think 20 inches, or you'd never think having so much snow here.
Yeah, and I know that they're enhancing the IBC right now to start to account for effects of climate change across the country. International Building Code, higher wind loads on the coastal areas, higher snow loads in areas that already get snow. Heat means moisture, and moisture means rain or snow.
Oh, I've had even in on residential properties, that rain will get in there and into the piping, you have to make sure that you're using the right or you have the right master electrician or electrician doing that work, because you have the wrong kind of panels or the wrong kind of equipment or anything goes wrong, it's just a headache, man.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's the truth. If you pay too cheap for something, you're going to probably pay for it twice over its lifetime. So do yourself a big favor and don't cut corners. Cheap ain't good and good ain't cheap. That's what they say. All right, that's it for this one, I think. Unless we got more questions from you guys.
Yeah, JB, didn't you have a question? I think you're trying to ask something.
No, I think I'm good. I've had a fair amount of talks with Quincy and Stephanie, so I know their product pretty well. I think if you have any questions that come up, Ryan, I can connect you, and probably I wanted you to see what they're doing so that when you're into solar later, that there's another product that can be added to what you're selling, a customer that can fit outside of the normal scope of the rooftop. So. Cool.
And we didn't talk about any of the secondary revenue model, Quincy, the things that can be added to your solar carports. We may do a whole other meeting to talk about that, because that's a completely different animal and it's complicated in its own right, but it's also important because it's another cash flow opportunity for property owners. Do you want to just maybe lightly touch on that? And then
yeah, sure. What Stephanie's talking about is, the electric vehicle, primarily charging for the workplace. That model is alive and well. There are revenue shares within that model that can be enhanced because of the carport, reducing the cost of getting that deployed to your parking lot. It can go all the way into, a few years down the road when we are supporting autonomous fleets. And these fleets are more than likely going to be electric 100% of the time, just because of the economics. Maintaining and charging those autonomous vehicles, those fleets, are going to require access to more parking with EV charging, and that marries well with the off-hour cycle for your commercial property. Expect to lease some of your parking spaces, as we're already seeing with Amazon fleet vehicles being stowed at commercial property parking lots overnight when all the employees have gone home, as a means of cutting costs. When you own a fleet, you don't need to buy a building when you can lease a parking lot day in, day out, and then just have your employees show up, jump in those delivery vehicles and leave. Imagine doing that when there are no people involved and the cars are robotic. Your parking lot can quickly turn into a hub for this type of technology. And then there's other ancillary costs that we can get into in the next talk that have to do with sensor-driven experiential marketing. Some of the technologies that would sense someone arriving on your property and deploy concierge services in real time to enhance that experience. And we think that the future is going to be in this sort of end-to-end connectivity, and the parking lot is a great place for a lot of that technology to exist. And one that might be sort of tongue-in-cheek related to COVID-19, and that is the ability for your parking lot to stage or hold 5G telecom equipment. That spectrum requires more antenna than are currently needed for 3G, 4G. And so telecommunications are looking for more places to deploy radios, and the parking lot, particularly a carport, could be advantageous there because you have a lot of coverage, and a lot of that signal is going to be devoted to connected cars as we move further and further into the future. And so, when COVID-19 is no longer blamed on by some of the fringe out there for 5G, then we'll see that discussion. I don't know. I'm kind of trying to make a joke about it, but I don't think it's landing. Anyway.
It's a joke grenade. It's going off slowly.
Yeah.
Parking reservations and those sorts of things are, I think, going to continue to be important as, we're still ordering food and having it picked up curbside to the parking lot. Those sorts of applications are going to be around for a while. And, innovation right now is really important, and people are open to it now more than ever. And so I think talking about how these things can work for property owners and applying them to your business and using these technologies that maybe seemed far out are not so far out anymore. People are adapting new things all the time and never thought they would have been before. So we're trying to talk about them a lot on new formats that we've never done before. So.
Adapt or die, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all of the questions I think we had from our side. So I know you guys are trying to wrap up.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us today. Thank you, Quincy. This was great. It was good seeing you, JB. Nice to meet you, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Have a good rest of the day.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
See you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.